The bridge of the GSV trembling quiet smelled like fear and recycled air, and Captain Shannara could not tell which one was making her stomach turn worse. She stood at the central console on legs that wanted very badly to run, her tall, deer-like frame casting a long shadow across the holographic display table, where the planet Vareth 9 rotated slowly in pale blue light, covered in thick jungle canopy and swirling clouds that hid whatever horrors lived beneath them. The ship was a Galactic Union survey vessel, built for scanning and cataloging, not for fighting, and certainly not for dealing with whatever the planetary AI had just flagged in its automated bioscan report. "Captain," said Gloob, the Omri science officer, and even without a proper face the gelatinous blob of sentient slime mold managed to look absolutely terrified, their translucent body vibrating at a frequency that Shannara recognized as extreme distress. "I have reviewed the scan results 3 times, and I must inform you that I very much wish I had not." "Just tell me," Shannara said, though every instinct in her herbivore brain was screaming at her to not hear whatever came next. "The bioscan has detected a massive concentration of predatory biosignatures on the surface," Gloob said, their voice wobbling like jelly in an earthquake. "Heat output, pheromone markers, movement patterns, metabolic readings, all of them are consistent with a single classification." Gloob paused, and the pause was so heavy that even the ship seemed to hold its breath. "Class 7 Apex Predator." The bridge went silent, and then it went very loud. 2 Velu navigators fainted on the spot, their slender bodies crumpling to the floor like folding chairs, and a Chikari communications officer began clicking her mandibles so fast it sounded like a bag of marbles rolling down a metal staircase. Shannara gripped the console with both hands because her knees had decided they no longer wanted to be knees. Class 7 was the highest biological threat rating before a planet got locked behind a permanent quarantine field, and the last Class 7 species the Union had discovered had eaten its way through an entire colony of 12,000 souls in a single breeding season before anyone even realized what was happening. "Tikat," Shannara said, turning to her weapons officer. The Chikari warrior was already at his station, his mantis-like arms flying across the targeting controls with the kind of calm efficiency that only a species literally evolved for combat could manage in a moment like this. "I am calculating orbital bombardment trajectories," Tikat said, his compound eyes reflecting the red glow of the weapon's display, "just in case." "We are a survey vessel," Shannara reminded him. "And I am a weapons officer on a survey vessel," Tikat replied, "which means I have had a great deal of free time to think about what I would do if something like this ever happened." Gloob oozed closer to the display, leaving a faint trail of stress mucus on the deck plating, and tapped a control with a pseudopod that shook so badly it took 3 attempts. "Captain, there is something else," Gloob said, "and I need you to understand that I am not making a joke because my species does not have a sense of humor, and even if we did this would not be funny." The scan overlay shifted, and a new marker appeared on the holographic planet, a small blue dot sitting right next to the enormous red signature of the apex predator. "That is a humanoid life sign," Gloob said. "What?" "A human, Captain. There is a living human being on the surface of Vareth 9 at the exact coordinates of the Class 7 Predator, and according to these readings that human is still alive." Shannara stared at the display, her large dark eyes blinking slowly as her brain tried to process information that did not want to be processed. "A human down there, next to a creature that could apparently eat starships for breakfast." "Hail them," she ordered. The Chikari communications officer, still clicking nervously, opened a channel, and for 30 agonizing seconds there was nothing but static and jungle noise, the sound of insects and wind and something that might have been running water or might have been the blood rushing through Shannara's ears. Then a voice came through, and it was not the voice of someone being eaten alive. It was the voice of someone who had just been woken up from a very comfortable nap. HHNNGH, yeah, who is this? Shannara leaned forward. This is Captain Shannara of the Galactic Union Survey Vessel Trembling Quiet. Please identify yourself immediately. There was a long pause, the sound of a yawn, and what might have been a can being opened. Corporal Eli Vasquez, retired, freelance planetary surveyor, badge number. Hold on, it is around here somewhere. You know what, never mind. What can I do for you folks? His voice was slow and relaxed, and carried the unmistakable tone of a man who had absolutely nowhere important to be. Corporal Vasquez, Shannara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Our bioscans have detected a Class 7 apex predator at your exact coordinates. Do you understand what that means? Another pause. A class what now? Class 7, Shannara repeated. The second highest biological threat classification in the Galactic Union Index. You are in immediate and extreme danger, and I am ordering you to evacuate your position right now. She could hear him scratching something, possibly his own head. Look, I appreciate the heads up, but I have been down here for about 3 weeks, and I have not seen anything that. The signal dissolved into static and then went dead. Shannara stared at the silent speakers, her ears pinned flat against her skull, and the bridge crew stared with her, and for a moment nobody moved because nobody could. He is dead, whispered one of the navigators who had regained consciousness, just in time to lose hope. We do not know that, Gloop said, though their body had turned a shade of gray that Shannara had never seen before and hoped never to see again. The signal could have been interrupted by atmospheric interference or equipment failure or by a Class 7 predator eating his communication array along with the rest of him, Tikat said helpfully. Shannara closed her eyes and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way the stress management training had taught her, and then she opened her eyes and made a decision that every cell in her body disagreed with. I am authorizing a full planetary evacuation alert, she said. Tikat, load the torpedo bays, Gloob, begin drafting a priority distress call to the nearest Galactic Union Fleet detachment, and someone wake up the rest of the navigators because we are going to need everyone on deck. She turned to face her crew, all of whom looked at her with expressions ranging from terror to admiration to the blank stare of someone whose brain had simply checked out of the situation entirely. There is a human being on that planet, Shannara said, and as long as there is even a chance that he is still alive, we have a duty to bring him home. She did not add what she was thinking, which was that if Eli Vasquez was dead, then they had a duty to recover whatever was left of him. And if the Class 7 predator had gotten to him first, there might not be very much left at all. Tikat's targeting console hummed as the torpedo bays came online, and somewhere far below them, through thousands of miles of atmosphere and cloud and jungle canopy, a retired Marine had just lost his radio signal and was probably very annoyed about it. Or he was dead. Shannara really hoped he was just annoyed. The rescue shuttle dropped through the atmosphere of Varath 9 like a stone thrown into a green ocean, and every soul on board wished they were somewhere else. Shannara sat in the command seat with her hooves pressed flat against the floor to keep her legs from shaking, and beside her Gloob had compressed into a tight, dense ball, which was the Omri equivalent of curling up and hiding under a blanket. Tikat stood at the rear of the shuttle holding a plasma lance that was almost as tall as he was, his compound eyes scanning the jungle canopy that rushed past the viewports in a blur of green and shadow. And behind him, 4 Chikari guard drones stood in perfect formation with their weapons raised and their antennae twitching. The shuttle pilot, a young Velu named Penar whose horns had not even finished growing in yet, gripped the flight controls so tightly that his knuckles had turned white beneath his fur. Captain, Penar said, the bioscanner is detecting the Predator's signature, and it is getting stronger. How much stronger? Shannara asked, I would rather not say. Penar. It is the strongest biological reading I have ever seen in my career, and I would like to go home now, please. Shannara put a hand on his shoulder and he flinched, but did not pull away. Take us down, she said. The shuttle broke through the canopy and settled into a small clearing where the jungle had been pushed back by what looked like a combination of human stubbornness and a machete. And as the landing struts touched down and the engines whined into silence, the rescue team got their first look at Eli Vasquez's camp. It was not what any of them had expected. There was a cargo tent, faded and patched in several places, with one corner propped up by a stick because the proper support pole had apparently broken at some point. And next to the tent, there was a folding chair that had seen better days and a small table made from a cargo crate turned upside down. Empty drink cans were stacked in a neat pyramid near the tree line, and a fishing rod leaned against a thick jungle tree, as if it had been placed there by someone who fully intended to pick it up again in a few hours. Music was playing from a small portable speaker sitting on the crate table, something soft and slow with a guitar, and a human voice singing words that the universal translator rendered as a song about a woman and a river and a broken truck. It looked like a vacation camp, the kind of place someone set up when they had no responsibilities and no particular desire to acquire any. This is where he lives, Gloob said, and the disbelief in their voice was thicker than their own body. Apparently, Shannara said. Tikat clicked his mandibles in what might have been confusion or contempt or both. There are no defenses, no perimeter barriers, no early warning systems. He has not even dug a trench. Maybe he did not have time before the predator arrived, Penar offered. He has been here for 3 weeks, Tikat said. Gloob extended a sensor pseudopod, and the portable bioscanner began to shriek, a high-piercing alarm that made everyone jump and made 2 of the Chikari guards lock into rigid defensive postures with their bladed forearms raised. The creature, Gloob whispered. It is here, it is right here. The reading is coming from inside the tent. Every weapon on the team swung toward the cargo tent, and Shannara felt her heart hammering so hard she was sure the predator could hear it. The tent was still, the music was still playing, and from inside there came absolutely no sound at all, which was somehow worse than if there had been screaming. On my mark, Tikat said, raising his plasma lance, we breached the tent in. The tent flap opened. 2 of the Chikari guards fainted instantly, their bodies hitting the ground with a clatter of chitin and weapons, because their species had a hardwired neurological response to the proximity of apex predators that shut their systems down like a switch being flipped, and Gloob began secreting a thick layer of defensive acid that sizzled faintly against the jungle floor. Shannara's legs locked completely, and she could not have moved if the entire planet had caught fire beneath her. But the thing that came out of the tent was not a monster. It was a man. Eli Vasquez stepped through the tent flap wearing no shirt and a pair of shorts that had probably been pants at some point before he had cut the legs off with a knife, and his feet were bare, and his hair was messy, and he was holding a metal mug that steamed with something dark and bitter smelling. He was not a large human by any standard, average height, lean and weathered by sun and years of hard living, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, and a jaw that needed a shave about a week ago. And draped across his shoulders like a living scarf was the Class 7 apex predator. It was a reptile, about 5 feet long from nose to tail, with iridescent green scales that caught the jungle light and threw it back in shimmering patterns, and thick powerful legs that hung limp over Eli's shoulders, and a broad flat head with heavy jaws that rested against his collarbone. Its eyes were barely open, 2 golden slits that blinked slowly and saw the entire rescue team, and apparently decided they were not interesting enough to wake up for. Its tongue flicked out once, tasted the air and retreated. Then it yawned, and the yawn revealed rows of teeth that looked like they had been designed by someone who hated everything soft in the universe. "Oh hey," Eli said, taking a sip from his mug. "Y'all the ones who called earlier, sorry about the signal. The antenna has been acting up since the last rainstorm. I keep meaning to fix it, but you know how it is." Nobody on the rescue team knew how it was because none of them had ever been in a situation remotely like this one. Shannara tried to speak, and what came out was a sound that was not a word in any known language. The bioscanner was still screaming, its alarm bouncing off the trees and sending birds scattering from the canopy, and Gloob reached over with a trembling pseudopod and turned it off because the noise was not helping anyone think clearly. "Corporal Vasquez," Shannara finally managed, her voice coming out about 2 octaves higher than normal, "there is a creature on your shoulders." Eli looked left, then right, as if he had genuinely forgotten. "Oh yeah, this is Duchess," he said, and he reached up and scratched the reptile under her jaw with one finger, and the creature's eyes closed completely, and she made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through Eli's chest. "She gets clingy in the mornings. Do not take it personally if she does not say hello. She is not a morning person." "That," Gloob said, pointing with a pseudopod that shook so badly it looked like a flag in a hurricane. "That is the Class 7 apex predator." Eli looked at Duchess, then at Gloob, then back at Duchess. Duchess was asleep again, a thin line of drool running from her jaw onto Eli's shoulder. Eli said. "Yes. Duchess. Yes. Class 7. Yes." Eli took another sip of his coffee and looked at the rescue team, at their weapons and their defensive formations and their unconscious guards and their acid-secreting science officer, and something that might have been understanding crossed his face. "Okay," he said slowly, "I think maybe y'all should come inside and sit down, and I will make some more coffee, and we can talk about this like calm, rational adults." Shannara looked at the tent where the apex predator had been sleeping moments ago, and every atom of her being screamed that going inside that tent was the worst idea in the history of ideas. But her legs unlocked, and she took a step forward, because she was a captain and captains did not run even when running was the only thing that made sense. Behind her, Ticket had not lowered his plasma lance and would not lower it for the next 6 hours. Duchess opened one eye, looked at him, and went back to sleep. They sat in a rough circle outside the tent because Shannara had refused to go inside, and Eli had said that was fair enough and brought the chairs out instead. And now, the rescue team was gathered around a man and his lizard, while the jungle hummed and buzzed around them like it did not care that first contact protocols were being shattered into 1,000 pieces. Duchess had moved from Eli's shoulders to the ground where she lay stretched out in a patch of warm sunlight with her belly pressed against the dirt, and her legs splayed out behind her, in a position that made her look less like an apex predator, and more like a deflated green balloon. Eli sat in his folding chair with his coffee and his bare feet, and his complete lack of concern, while Gloob tried to explain exactly what Duchess was. "The species is native to Varath 9, Gloob said, their body still faintly gray with residual terror, but their scientific curiosity pulling them forward despite every survival instinct telling them to stop talking and start running. We have cataloged them as Varath monitor predators, and they are, Corporal Vasquez, I need you to understand this clearly. They are among the most dangerous biological organisms ever recorded in the Galactic Union database." Eli said. "Adult specimens can grow up to 12 feet in length." "She is only 5, Eli said, looking at Duchess with what Shannara could only describe as parental pride. "She has got some growing to do." "Their saliva contains a complex venom cocktail that attacks the nervous system of virtually every carbon-based life form we have encountered," Gloob continued, their voice getting higher with each fact as if they were building a case in a courtroom where the defendant was a sleeping lizard. "They possess infrared vision capable of tracking prey through complete darkness. Their scales have tested resistant to low-grade plasma scoring, and their jaw bite force has been measured at a level sufficient to shear through standard starship hull plating. Eli looked at Duchess, who had begun to snore. And perhaps most significantly, Gloob said, their pheromone signature triggers a cascading neurochemical terror response in nearly every prey species in the known galaxy, which includes every single species currently on this planet except for you. Is that why your guards keep fainting? Eli asked. Yes, Tikat said stiffly from behind his plasma lance, which he had not put down, and which was still pointed in the general direction of Duchess's head. It is an involuntary response, and it is very embarrassing, and I would appreciate it if we did not discuss it further. Eli held up his hands in surrender and then looked down at Duchess again, and his expression was the expression of a man looking at something he loved very much, even though that something could apparently eat through metal. Look, I hear what you are saying, Eli said, and I am not going to pretend she is a hamster because she is not. I have seen what she can do, and I know what she is. But she is also my girl, and I found her when she was about the size of my forearm, tangled up in swamp vines during my first week here. He leaned back in his chair, and the memory softened his face in a way that made Shannara feel something complicated. She was just a baby, he said, all wrapped up and scared and making this little hissing sound that was probably supposed to be threatening but just sounded sad. So I cut the vines off her and she bit me. He held up his left hand, and there was a faded scar across the back of it. Drew blood and everything, nasty little teeth even then. And I figured that was that, but the next morning she was sitting outside my tent just staring at me with those big gold eyes, and I thought, well, okay, maybe she is hungry. You fed her, Gloob said in the tone of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. I gave her some of my fish, Eli said, and she ate it, and then she just stayed, and the next day she stayed again, and the day after that she followed me down to the river and sat on a rock while I was fishing, and that was pretty much it. That was pretty much it, Shannara repeated. Yeah, Eli said. She just never left, and I was not about to make her. She chose me, and that meant something even if she was choosing me because I was an easy meal ticket. She is a Class 7 apex predator, and you adopted her because she looked at you, Tikat said, and his voice carried the specific frustration of a professional soldier confronted with someone who had no business being alive, and yet somehow was. She also does this thing where she brings me fish, Eli said, brightening up. She catches them in the river and then brings them back and drops them on my face in the morning, every single morning, right on my face, cold, wet fish at dawn. And I think she thinks she is feeding me, which is honestly kind of sweet, even though it is also disgusting. Duchess's tail twitched in her sleep, and she made a small gurgling sound. She also guards the camp, Eli added, which mostly means she sleeps in the doorway of the tent, so I have to step over her every time I need to go outside. But one time there was this big swamp thing, 6 legs, lots of teeth, real nasty looking, and it came creeping up on the camp at night. What happened? Shannara asked despite herself. Duchess woke up, Eli said simply, and she was not happy about it because Duchess does not like being woken up, and by the time I got out of the tent with my flashlight, the swamp thing was in 3 pieces and Duchess was already going back to sleep. She did not even eat it. She just killed it for waking her up and went back to bed. He said this the way someone might describe their cat knocking a glass off a table. Gloob turned to Shannara and said very quietly, Captain, I believe I am beginning to understand something about humans that the Galactic Union has fundamentally failed to grasp. And what is that? Shannara asked. They know, Gloob said. They know exactly how dangerous these creatures are, and they simply decide that it does not matter. The bond matters more than the danger. Shannara looked at Eli, who was now on the ground next to Duchess, rubbing her belly with both hands, while the most terrifying organism on the planet rolled onto her back and kicked one leg in the air like a dog. Corporal Vasquez, Gloob said with the careful tone of a scientist approaching a question that might break their understanding of the universe. Do humans commonly form bonds with apex predators? Eli thought about it for a moment, while continuing to rub Duchess's belly. I mean, we domesticated wolves, he said. Turned them into dogs, took thousands of years, but we did it. And cats were straight-up ambush predators before we got to them. Little murder machines, and people keep them in their houses and let them sleep on their faces. He paused. My grandma had a parrot that could crack a walnut with its beak, and it bit anyone who came near it except her. And it screamed curse words at the mailman every morning for 11 years. She loved that bird. He looked up at the alien faces, staring at him, with mixed expressions of horror and fascination. We keep snakes as pets, he added, and spiders, and there is a guy back on Earth who has a pet alligator that he walks on a leash. So yeah, I would say this is pretty normal for us. The clearing was very quiet except for the jungle sounds, and the soft rumble coming from Duchess's chest, as Eli found the spot behind her jaw that she really liked. Shannara stood up and walked to the shuttle and sat down at the communications console, and began typing a formal report to the Galactic Union Xenobiology Council. The subject line read RE, Class 7 Apex Predator Reclassification Request Status, Domesticated Pending. Her hands would not stop shaking as she typed, and she did not think they would stop for a very long time. Behind her through the open shuttle door, she could see Eli lying on his back in the grass with Duchess draped across his chest like a 5-foot weighted blanket. And both of them had their eyes closed, and both of them were completely at peace. It was the most terrifying thing Shannara had ever seen. The alarm hit the bridge of the trembling quiet like a slap, and Shannara was on her hooves before she was fully awake, stumbling from the rest alcove to the command console, where every screen had turned red, and every speaker was screaming the same 2 words over and over. Hostile contact, hostile contact, hostile contact. Report, she shouted, and Tikat was already at the weapons station, his compound eyes reflecting the crimson glow of 3 new signatures on the sensor display. Kreth Raiders, Tikat said, and his voice was the calmest thing on the bridge, which was not saying much because everything else was pure chaos. 3 ships, heavy armament class. They dropped out of hyperspace 40 seconds ago, and they are on an intercept course. Shannara felt the blood drain from her face because she knew what Kreth Raiders were and what they did. They were pirate slavers who worked the outer systems, and they took everything, cargo and data cores and crew. And the species on this ship were worth a great deal of money on the markets where people were sold like spare parts. Vilu were prized for domestic servitude, Chikari for pit fighting, and Omri for chemical processing. And a survey vessel like the Trembling Quiet was exactly the kind of soft target the Kreth liked best. We have minimal weapons, Shannara said, and the words tasted like ash. 4 minutes until they are in weapons range, Tikat said. And Captain, I must be honest with you, our torpedo bays were loaded for planetary bombardment contingency. They were never meant for ship-to-ship combat. We will get perhaps 1 volley before they overwhelm us. The bridge crew was frozen. Every Vilu pressed against their stations like prey animals trying to make themselves small. And the Chikari officers were clicking in rapid distress patterns that sounded like hail on a tin roof. Gloob had turned completely white, which Shannara had not known was possible. Can we run? She asked. Their ships are faster, Tikat said. Can we call for help? The nearest fleet detachment is 11 hours away. Shannara gripped the console and tried to think, but her brain was full of static and fear, and the knowledge that everyone on her ship was about to become someone's property or someone's corpse. Let me see them, said a voice from behind her. She turned, and Eli Vasquez was standing at the bridge entrance. And he was not the same man who had been sitting in a folding chair, scratching his lizard's belly 2 hours ago. He had come aboard at Shannara's insistence after the rescue mission because she was not going to leave a sapient being on a planet with an active predator classification. And he had come reluctantly and brought Duchess with him in a cargo carrier that she had immediately escaped from because apparently standard containment units were not designed for creatures that could bite through hull plating. But the man standing in the bridge doorway now was someone else entirely. His posture had changed, and his eyes had changed, and even the way he breathed had changed. And Shannara realized with a chill that ran from her horns to her hooves that she was looking at what a human being became when the part of them that knew how to kill woke up. 20 years of Earth Marine training had just switched on behind those flat, steady eyes like a machine warming up. "Show me their formation," Eli said, and it was not a request. Tiket looked at Shannara, and Shannara nodded, because she had no better options and no worse ones either. The display shifted to show the 3 Kreth ships in a standard attack wedge, closing fast, and Eli studied it for exactly 4 seconds. "What weapons do you have?" he asked. "4 plasma torpedoes and point defense arrays," Tiket said. "Will they board?" "Kreth always board. They want the crew alive." "How many in a boarding party?" 8 to 12 warriors, heavy armor shock weapons designed to incapacitate, not kill. Eli nodded slowly, and something happened to his face, something that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else that Shannara had a word for, and every Velu on the bridge took an unconscious step back from him. Even Tiket, a species bred for war across 10,000 generations, felt his antennae flatten against his skull. "Okay," Eli said. "Here is what we are going to do. You are going to fire your torpedoes at the lead ship, not to destroy it but to make them angry and make them commit to boarding. Then you are going to let them dock and funnel the boarding party through the lower cargo bay." "You want us to let them board," Shannara said. "I want them in an enclosed space," Eli said, "and I am going to need Duchess." 15 minutes later, the Kreth boarding shuttle latched onto the trembling Quiet's lower hull with a sound like a giant metal parasite burrowing into skin, and the cargo bay doors were open, and the lights were off because Eli had asked for the lights to be off, and nobody had argued with him. Shannara watched from the bridge camera feed as 8 Kreth warriors poured into the cargo bay, huge reptilian creatures in scarred battle armor carrying shock lances and neural disruptors. And they moved with the confidence of predators who had done this 100 times before and expected to do it 100 times again. They spread out in the darkness, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the black air, and one of them laughed and said something in Kreth that the translator rendered as "Survey vessel, easy cargo. We will be done before the meal cycle." Then Eli cut the ventilation, and Duchess's pheromones began to fill the room. It happened slowly at first, a faint chemical whisper in the recycled air that the Kreth did not consciously notice but their bodies did, and Shannara watched on the camera as the first warrior stopped moving, his head turning left and right as if searching for something he could not see. Then the second warrior paused, and the third, and their movements changed from confident to cautious to something that Shannara recognized in her bones, because she had felt it herself just hours ago on the planet's surface. Fear. The Kreth were a predator species, top of their own food chain on their homeworld, and they had never in their evolutionary history encountered something that made them feel like prey. Until now. The pheromones hit critical concentration, and Shannara saw it happen. She saw the moment when 8 hardened warriors simultaneously experienced the neurochemical reality of being hunted by something worse than them, and their formation fell apart like a house built on sand. One of them started breathing hard, another backed into a wall, a third raised his weapon at shadows that moved in ways shadows should not move. Then the hissing started. It was a low sound, so deep it was more vibration than noise, and it came from everywhere and nowhere, and it resonated in the chest cavity in a way that bypassed the brain entirely and spoke directly to the ancient screaming animal that lived at the base of every spine. Eli moved through the darkness like he had been born in it, silent and precise, and he was not alone. Duchess was fully awake now, and she was not drowsy, and she was not lazy, and she was not the fat, happy lizard who slept on boots and brought dead fish as gifts. She was 1,200 pounds of armored muscle and venom and teeth that could bite through starship plating, and she moved beside her human, with a coordination that spoke of 3 weeks of hunting together in the jungles of Verath 9, and she made no sound at all until she did. The first Kreth warrior went down without a scream. The second managed half of one. By the third, the remaining warriors were firing wildly into the dark, their shots lighting up the cargo bay in strobing flashes that showed glimpses of something green and fast, and terrible moving between them like a nightmare with scales. It was over in 90 seconds. Eli's voice came through the bridge communicator, steady and calm and breathing only slightly harder than normal. Cargo bay is clear, going to need a mop though. The remaining 2 Kreth ships hung in space outside, and Shannara watched their sensor profiles as their scans penetrated the trembling Quiet's hull and found what was in the cargo bay, and she watched the exact moment when their systems registered the Class 7 biosignature. Both ships turned and ran for hyperspace so fast they left radiation trails, and they did not send a message, and they did not look back. Shannara sat in the captain's chair and stared at the camera feed from the cargo bay. Eli was sitting on the floor with his back against a cargo container, and the bay was dark and wet, and she did not want to think about what it was wet with. And Duchess was in his lap, all 5 feet of bloodied, pheromone-drenched apex predator curled up like a cat with her head on his thigh. Eli was scratching behind her jaw and her eyes were half closed, and her tail was moving slowly back and forth across the floor, in a motion that could only be described one way. She was wagging. "Who is a good girl?" Eli murmured, his voice soft and warm and completely at odds with everything that had just happened in that room. "Who is Daddy's little war crime?" Duchess rumbled and pressed her head harder into his hand, and Shannara turned off the camera feed because she had seen enough. She had seen more than enough. She had seen a human and his pet dismantle 8 armed warriors in 90 seconds in the dark, and then sit down and cuddle about it. And she was going to need to file a report about this, and she had absolutely no idea how to describe what she had just witnessed in language that the Galactic Union would believe. Ticket appeared at her side, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said something that Shannara would remember for the rest of her life. "I have been a warrior for 30 years, Ticket said, and I have never been afraid of anything that was on my side before." Shannara nodded, because there was nothing else to do. Below them, Eli began to hum a song to his lizard, and the sound drifted up through the ship like something gentle floating on top of something terrible. 3 months later, Captain Shannara stood at a podium in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Union Xenobiology Council, and looked out at an audience of 600 delegates representing 400 species, and wondered how exactly her life had led her to this moment. The chamber was enormous, a vast dome of crystal and living metal that floated in orbit above Verath 9, and the seats rose in concentric rings from the central floor to the upper galleries, where the smallest species sat in magnified viewing pods, and the largest species occupied platforms reinforced to hold their weight. Every seat was full, and every eye and sensor and receptor was pointed at her. This testimony had become the most watched Xeno broadcast of the current cycle, surpassing even the annual Predator Migration Report, and the time a Chikari hive queen had laid eggs during a trade summit. And Shannara understood why, because what she was about to present was going to change the way every species in the galaxy thought about humans. She took a breath and began. "Honored delegates," she said. 3 months ago my vessel, the GSV Trembling Quiet, conducted a routine biosurvey of the planet Verath 9 and in the course of that survey, we encountered two things that I must now bring before this council." She activated the holographic display, and Duchess appeared in the center of the chamber, a perfect three-dimensional recreation of the Verath monitor predator rendered in light and color, her scales shimmering green and gold, her jaws slightly open to show the rows of teeth that had given Shannara nightmares for weeks. Several delegates in the lower rings made sounds of distress, and a Velu ambassador had to be helped back into her seat. "This is a Verath monitor predator," Shannara said, "and by every measurable metric in our biological threat index it qualifies as a Class 7 apex predator, the highest classification before mandatory planetary quarantine." She let the data speak: the venom analysis, the bite force measurements, the infrared hunting capability, the plasma-resistant scales, and the pheromone terror response data that made the chamber shift with unease as delegates felt echoes of the fear just from reading about it. "And this," Shannara said, changing the display, "is Corporal Eli Vasquez, retired Earth Marine, freelance planetary surveyor." Eli appeared in hologram next to Duchess, standing in his camp with his bare feet and his coffee mug, and his complete lack of anything resembling appropriate caution. "Corporal Vasquez has domesticated a Class 7 apex predator," Shannara said. "He did this without genetic engineering, without cybernetic implants, without chemical subjugation, without any technology whatsoever." The chamber erupted. A Krillian delegate with 17 eyes and a voice like grinding rocks stood and demanded to know what methods had been used. Surely there was some form of neural conditioning or behavioral modification. No sapient being simply befriended the biological equivalent of a natural disaster. A Fenari diplomat whose species communicated through color patterns flashed urgent reds and oranges that translated roughly to this: "is impossible and also terrifying." 3 different delegates asked simultaneously whether this constituted a violation of the Predator Containment Accords, and whether the human should be arrested. Shannara waited for the noise to subside, and then she opened a live hololink to the surface of Verath 9. Eli appeared, sitting in his folding chair in the clearing, and he looked exactly the same as he had 3 months ago, except his beard was slightly longer, and he had acquired a hat that appeared to be made from woven jungle leaves. Duchess was draped across his lap with her head hanging off one side and her tail hanging off the other, and she was fast asleep in the way that only a creature with absolutely no natural predators could sleep, which was to say completely, and without any awareness of the 600 delegates staring at her from orbit. "Corporal Vasquez," the Krillian delegate said, leaning forward with all 17 eyes narrowed, "explain to this council how you subdued and controlled this creature." Eli scratched Duchess behind the jaw, and she made her rumbling sound and one leg twitched. "I did not subdue her," Eli said. "I fed her, I was nice to her, and she stuck around. That is pretty much the whole story." "That cannot be the whole story," the Krillian said. "It is though," Eli said, and he sounded genuinely confused by the confusion. "She is a good girl and she likes fish and belly rubs. I do not know what else you want me to tell you." The chamber erupted again, and Shannara let it go on for a while, because she needed the time to compose herself before the next part. When the noise died down, she turned to Gloob, who had been given a speaking position at the secondary podium, and whose body had been cycling through colors of nervous excitement for the past hour. "Science Officer Gloob," Shannara said, "please present your findings." Gloob extended themselves to their full height, which was not very impressive, but their voice carried the weight of someone who had spent 3 months studying something that had fundamentally altered their understanding of life in the galaxy. "Honored delegates," Gloob began. "Over the past 3 months I have conducted extensive research into human evolutionary biology, behavioral ecology, and interspecies relationship patterns, and I have developed a theory that I believe explains not only Corporal Vasquez's relationship with Duchess, but also a much larger pattern that the Galactic Union has failed to recognize. Gloob activated their own display, and it showed Earth, the small blue planet that had produced the most confusing species the galaxy had ever encountered. Humans, Gloob said, occupy a unique ecological niche that has no parallel in our taxonomic records. They are what I have classified as persistence-bonding predators. The term hung in the air, and 600 delegates leaned forward. Most predator species in the galaxy hunt, they pursue and kill and consume, and their relationships with other species are defined by this dynamic, predator and prey, nothing else. But humans do something that no other known species does. Gloob paused for effect, and Shannara thought that, for a species without a sense of humor, they had certainly learned dramatic timing. They adopt. The display changed to show images from Earth's history, wolves sitting beside ancient humans around fires, horses carrying riders across plains, falcons perched on gloved hands, elephants responding to gentle commands, dolphins swimming alongside boats, and in every image the pattern was the same. A human being standing next to something that should by all rights have eaten them, and both of them looking perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. Humans did not simply coexist with the dangerous species on their homeworld, Gloob said. They formed emotional bonds with them, symbiotic relationships built not on dominance or control, but on trust and mutual benefit, and something that the humans call love, which is a neurochemical bonding state so powerful that it overrides their own survival instincts. They took wolves, one of their planet's most effective pack predators, and over generations turned them into companions. They took wildcats, solitary ambush predators with retractable claws and killing instincts, and brought them into their homes. They domesticated horses and oxen and falcons and even insects. And they did this not through technology but through patience and kindness and a fundamental willingness to look at something dangerous and say, "I want to be its friend." Gloob turned to face the full chamber. This is not ignorance, and it is not insanity. It is a survival strategy, and it is the strategy that allowed a medium-sized primate with no claws and no venom and no armor to become the dominant species on one of the most hostile worlds in the catalogued galaxy. Humans do not just survive alongside apex predators, Gloob said, and their voice dropped to a frequency that every species in the chamber could feel in whatever they had instead of bones. They make apex predators love them. The chamber was very quiet. A Velu delegate in the third ring stood slowly, and her voice was steady even though her legs were not. "Science Officer Gloob," she said, "if humans can form bonding relationships with a Class 7 apex predator, if they can take the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy and turn them into companions who will fight and kill for them out of loyalty and affection, then I must ask the question that I think everyone in this chamber is thinking." She paused, and the silence was so complete that Shannara could hear her own heartbeat. "What does that make the humans?" Gloob was quiet for a long time, and when they spoke, their voice was barely above a whisper, but the chamber acoustics carried it to every seat. "Class 8, Gloob said, at minimum." The chamber did not erupt this time. Instead it went perfectly still. The kind of stillness that happens when 600 beings simultaneously realize that the universe is larger and stranger and more frightening than they had believed. On the HoloLink, Eli was completely oblivious to this. Duchess had rolled over on his lap, and he was rubbing her belly with both hands and talking to her in a soft voice that the microphones barely picked up. "Yeah, you are a good girl. You are the best girl. You want some fish later. Yeah, you do. I know you do." And Duchess was making a sound that no Verath monitor predator had ever been recorded making in the entire history of the species. A low, rhythmic rumble that rose and fell with her breathing, steady and warm in content. She was purring. Shannara watched the HoloLink, and she watched the 600 delegates watching the HoloLink, and she saw the same expression on every face regardless of species. A mixture of wonder and disbelief, and the particular kind of fear that comes not from seeing something dangerous, but from realizing that you have been living next to something dangerous your entire life without knowing it. She returned to her quarters that evening and sat at her console and opened a new file and began typing her final addendum to the survey report. Addendum to Survey Report 117742V9. Varath 9 is hereby recommended for full quarantine, not due to indigenous fauna, but due to the presence of one human male and his pet. The Galactic Union is not ready. I am not sure it will ever be. She paused and thought about Eli and Duchess, and the sound of purring, and the look on a man's face when he held something that could kill him and loved it anyway. End log, she typed. And somewhere far below on the surface of Varath 9, in a small clearing in the jungle where a cargo tent stood next to a folding chair, and a fishing rod leaned against a tree, Eli Vasquez lay on his back in the grass with a Class 7 apex predator curled up on his chest, and he was looking at the stars coming out one by one in the darkening sky, and he was completely and utterly at peace. Duchess sighed in her sleep and pressed her heavy head against his heartbeat. And the stars looked down on them both and did not say a word, because some things in the universe were beyond explanation and beyond classification and beyond fear. Some things were just a man and his lizard. And that was enough.